O'Brien has received government approval for the new enhanced MICA scheme. It's a 2.7 billion scheme. Grant rates in keeping with the construction cost report prepared by the Society of Chartered Surveyors Ireland. A government guarantee in regard to remediation works other than full demolition and rebuild. A second grant might be available there. Questionable logic, but anyway. A revised application process which removes the financial barrier to the scheme. Alternative accommodation and storage costs and immediate repair works to a maximum value of €25,000 within the overall grant cap. The housing agency playing a key role under the enhanced scheme by taking on financial costs of testing and assessing homes and determining on behalf of the local authorities the appropriate remediation options and grant rate for each dwelling. The extension of the enhanced scheme beyond the current scope of principal private residence only to also cover rented dwellings registered with the RTB on or before the 1st of November 2021. Inclusion of Clare and Limerick in the enhanced scheme upon commencement, and exempt development status under planning legislation for remediation works carried out under the defective concrete blocks grant scheme on a like-for-like basis. Right, okay. Michael Doherty, PRO of the MICA Action Group, good morning to you.
Good morning, Greg.
I'm kind of break this down into the most basic terms for my benefit and for those who want to cross it as much as others. How close are we to this being the scheme?
It's not that far away, Greg, and I think that's probably the disappointing part. You know, there was an opportunity missed yesterday to get this over the line. There was an opportunity that we could have turned around and said, we believe we now have a pathway without further campaigning. They knew what they needed to do to make that happen. We had talked a lot of that stuff over the last 6 months, and movement was, you know, there was certainly movement, and the disappointing part yesterday was that they sort of resorted back to the position that they had in November, which made us feel that a lot of the work we did over the last 6 months was a complete waste of time. That was very frustrating for us. Right,
what's missing?
Yeah, well, we're missing things like the inclusion of inflation in there. Okay, so we know that we need the figures that were SCSI independent figures. They were valid on the 28th of February, valid for the scope of work that they were allowed to price for. They had one hand tied up behind their back because the department dictated the terms of reference. And for example, you know, you had to be working to 15-year-old standards that you can't now do. So you're going to have to pay the difference yourself. Government knew that when they put that in place. You don't have the foundations included in there. You don't even have a carpet in your home. There's no finishes. And everybody knows there's thousands to be spent in finishing a home after you get a shell.
So all of that was left out. Is this an 80-20 scheme then?
Yeah, I would say what you're looking at closer to is somewhere between 80 and 90% for a lot of people. That means homeowners out tens of thousands. And that's an issue for us. And they could close that gap very easily. And on that one, Greg, we are in the game of offering solutions. The solution we offered in that case was that if you're not going to give us a true 100% redress for the house we had, then give us 100% true redress for a smaller house.
Yeah, that's not going to be for everyone either, though.
With the same grant. But listen, we're in the solutions business. We're trying to find a solution for every category of issue, Greg. And one of them is the amount of people that are saying, listen, we don't have we don't have borrowing capacity. We can't go to a bank. We need to take whatever grant money the government has given us and make the best of it. We have no other options.
Okay.
And we said, okay, so what about these people if they were prepared to downsize, which should be helping the Green manifesto? It also allows this whole thing about, they were talking about these mansions in Donegal. Okay, for homeowners that are prepared to do it, and you're just giving them a choice, prepared to downsize to a smaller house, let them use the grant that the government is going to give them anyway and spend it on a true 100% basis for that smaller house. And that was really, really happening. We were right on the edge of that happening, and they pulled it back yesterday. Massively disappointed, and that locked out a lot of people from a true pathway to 100% redress.
This isn't 100% redress for anyone, this scheme. So it's completely unacceptable.
Yes, not as it stands. It's not, and that's why we've said we have to reject this here, Greg. Unfortunately, there was an opportunity to do it the easy way yesterday, based on good faith and negotiations that were at really, really strong positions, and they pulled back from the edge yesterday for whatever reason, and it looks like they're going to make us put in the hard yards now through compressed PLS and amendments.
Talk to me about compressed PLS, because what the majority of people listening to would have heard pre-legislative scrutiny, okay?
Yeah.
that the government wish to bypass that. They're going to ask the Housing Committee to bypass that. So are you describing the debate in the Dáil as PLS now? Like, what do you mean by compressed PLS?
No, so what we did say, Greg, all along was that there was an opportunity for what we talked about, accelerated PLS. That's basically a process. And if you're going to do the whole thing to the letter of the law, you could be several weeks. That's fair enough. But we identified an opportunity to do it through a compressed or accelerated PLS. And that really means that you've got the 6 key stakeholders in a one-day event, but they get to air their views on what's going on. They get to be cross-examined by the Joint Housing Committee. The 6 key stakeholders, number 1 is the Housing Department. They have to stand over some of the stuff that they've in here that doesn't make sense. For example, IS 465, it doesn't include foundations or deleterious materials. They have to speak up on that. You also have the Housing Agency, who are the people that are going to be overseeing this entire scheme. You also have SCSI, who are the people that put together the rates, and I want them to say that their hands were tied behind their back, and what they were forced to do was to price for not a modern day house, but for a house that was 15 years old, and exclusions on top of that. I need them to say that. And then you have got Engineers Ireland, who are the engineers, the likes of the Ambrose McCluskeys and these guys that have said from day one there's been an issue. They get a chance to say it as a body representing Engineers Ireland. You've got the homeowner representatives who will be there. And then you also have what other experts we may want to include and we can get to hand to come in to argue our case on a professional capacity, on our basis, on a one-day wonder.
Right, where we're at the moment, though, right, is that it could be, let's just, an arbitrary figure, 80-20. By the time everything's done, let's call it an 80-20 scheme. So it's less than the 90-10 scheme that didn't turn out to be that. We also have a situation whereby engineers will not sign off on work that's being done. We have the government have announced that we'll fix the outer leaf. If the inner leaf starts cracking, well, you can come back and we'll fix that. Obviously, that doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, okay? But they're persistent with that. So engineers aren't going to sign off on this work. There is no scheme. I'm not trying to be dramatic, Michael, by the way, but on the basis of those two things, right, there's nothing here that people travel down to Dublin to march for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, the people and the questions that you have just asked, we will have the right people to speak for themselves as opposed to us speaking on their behalf, the likes of the engineers that are saying we can't sign off on what's here, right? So that's the opportunity that we won. That was the one win that we had yesterday in our negotiations with Kevin Dillon and John O'Connor in Sligo yesterday, that we come away with this compressed PLS, and it allows the People's Day in Court in front of the Joint Housing Committee. But yesterday, and that's a good start.
You would have heard the exchange between Padraig McLaughlin and the Taoiseach yesterday. Paraphrasing, Padraig McLaughlin said the importance of PLS. Micheál Martin said effectively, you know what happens if this goes to pre-ledge. It'll get bogged down, it'll get caught up. We need to get things going now. We need to start getting houses fixed. He referenced the 300 odd houses the council have. So, I mean, the Taoiseach seems to be suggesting that this is going to bypass pre-legislative scrutiny, but you're saying there's a compact version of it. Do you know what I mean? So again, I just want to clarify that for those that feel that those two things are a contradiction. Yeah,
well, you've got the longhand version and the shorthand version. The longhand version was what we asked for because we believe that it still gives more time to, maybe put, in the back of things, issues that arise from a meeting, they may take a week to come back with answers. We don't have that luxury, but we do have the compressed version.
Let me give you a scenario then, Michael. Let me give you a scenario, right? So you know for a fact, everyone knows out there now at this stage the concerns, say, engineers have, right? And foundations. Okay, so the Housing Committee is government dominated, okay? It's made up by majority government members. What faith do we have that in any way, even if they hear these experts, they will not go, well, on the balance of everything that's going on, we're going to approve the scheme as the government has suggested? That's the likely outcome of that, surely.
Yeah, good point. And I'd say the response to that is that this is now documented. They can't say that they're not aware. The experts will have spoken. It will be documented. The report will be furnished to the government, and the government then have to acknowledge that, and they have to acknowledge it and accept it, or acknowledge it and reject it. The fact is they'll have to acknowledge it, and that's the first time. That's something they wouldn't have had to do if we didn't have any form of PLS. So that leaves them in a very difficult position. That's documented. That's on record for evermore amen. And if they deliberately turn down and reject what is very plausible evidence-based recommendations, then on their head be it.
Yeah, but
and that's where the difference lies.
But what happens next, though? Because that's where we're going, Michael. And I hate to be pessimistic. This is 90-10 all over again. It feels just like the conversations I was having on this programme and ahead of that. And I hope I'm proven wrong. But it looks like, what does that mean then? Like, let's say, for instance, the majority is one. Joe McHugh has said he won't accept nitpicking. He will only back this if the families back it, right? Your group backs it, okay? If this comes if it's sorted by way of a vote in the Dáil, does Joe McHugh abstain and vote against the government and the majority is gone? Like, what do you mean by take them down? What does that mean? Yeah.
So maybe just, I think this part's important before I answer that part, and I will answer it, as you know. The first part is they could have done it easy yesterday, they didn't. There is another opportunity for them to get it right. That is through this compressed PLS, and then also through the amendments that will be tabled by us and by opposition that will go through the floors of the Oireachtas, the Dáil and the Seanad. They'll be discussed, they'll be voted on, and then government have to then take them overall amendments, the series of amendments that comes from the Oireachtas process, that comes from the compressed PLS process, and accept them or reject them. If they accept them, then we're all good. And they didn't do it the easy way yesterday, but at least we would have it on the 15th of July through that process of amendments. If they, on the other hand, still reject it outright, that's when we press that trigger and we say, you know, the safety catch has been off the campaign shotgun here. This has been teeing up for some time. We have opposition lined up reasonably well now at this point in time. Just before your call, I had a phone call from Ivana, the head of the Labour Party. Yeah. So all of this, we're teeing up in the background here. Government are well aware of that. We had a very strong meeting yesterday with Kevin Dillon and John O'Connor. They know that government are vulnerable. They know that we know government are vulnerable. And we know Joe McHugh cannot say we're nitpicking if we're going to be costing homeowners tens of thousands of euros.
Fairness, so in fairness, he said the government can't seem to be nitpicking.
That's exactly right. And, you know, Joe has to stand by that. I hope Joe does that. And I actually think he will. I'd like to think he got shafted with a 90-10 scheme also, let's not forget. So he's also been, you know, plowing a lone furrow for a long time here. This is his opportunity. But at the end of the day, he's going to have to man up, as he said he would. I hope and I do expect him to do that. We have got every TD in these affected counties that are now going to have to walk the plank. They are either going to back their people or their party. And that's assuming that the party doesn't do the right thing by the 15th of July. That is the horizon we're fixed on. After that, there's no holds barred. Government goes as far as we're concerned. We're not going to spend another day with them. And our focus of our campaign is completely on exposing the vulnerability of this government and the TDs that are within it. The government goes, but the TDs go along with it. And I don't think them TDs can ever walk back into their own county with their head held high. That'll be the price they pay for turning their back on their people.
Yes, but do you have a ceiling to be reached? In other words, you have to be very clear. And when I say you, by the way, I'm talking about the Micah Action movement, the Effective Bloc movement. You know, how far do they have to come? Is it inclusion of foundations? Is it to see about other defective materials? Yeah. Are those the two things that if they say, right, okay, then that's it. We have to come to a point where something is acceptable. Is that it?
Yeah. We have got. They know exactly what they need to do, Greg. They know exactly. It's been tabled for them. They know exactly what it is they need to do. They've just been reluctant to do it. There's a series of things, but there are a few big ones in there. One of them is that downsizing opportunity. That's a zero cost, a zero additional cost to the state. Right? Now, to not allow that is both cruel and vindictive. That's all you could say about that, because it doesn't cost them one extra penny. What they're hoping to do is that they can claw money back. That's just not acceptable. The cap at 420 excluded 18% of our people whenever that was first announced on the 30th of November. Due to inflation and no other reason, that now rises to a third of our people, not 18%. The way that you get to 18% is to move your cap up to 460. That's a red line for us. They have to go there. That's just inflation. That's 9.5% increase. That's the world we're in here. We have other things in there as well regarding the IS 465 that needs to be reviewed. They've been sitting on their hands on this, Greg, for months, and they're going nowhere. They know what they need to do, Greg. They're holding off doing it as long as they possibly can. But the gun will be to their head on the 15th of July.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, okay, Michael. Listen, thanks for your time as always. I really do appreciate it. All right, take care of yourself.